Okay, this is lesson 9, video 2, and we're moving on to the inflammatory response, which is part of the innate immune system. So the inflammatory response is a response triggered when body tissues are injured. This causes the injured cells to release chemicals such as histamines and kinines. These allow the blood vessels to dilate, activate pain receptors, attract white blood cells. And then the dilation of the blood vessels is really important because it increases blood flow to the area, and that's why sometimes when you have a cut or a wound, the area really becomes kind of swollen and red. It's because that you have more liquid going to that, or more swelling in that area, and it's called edema, and that's why the area is red. Neutrophils, which are a type of white blood cell that are made in bone marrow, are attracted to the area through chemicals released by the injured body cells. And they squeeze through the little capillary walls called diapedesis, and they really basically are going to just engulf bacteria and pathogens until they die. Neutrophils just keep eating and eating and eating and eating and eating until they can't survive anymore. And you've probably seen dead neutrophils before. Anytime that you have pus in a wound, that's actually dead neutrophils that have tried to control the infection. Macrophages are larger white blood cells that are going to come and replace the neutrophils once they are worn out. And then if all else fails, we have a special type of cell called T cells that will come and try to wage war on the foreign invaders. So this is just a quick overview of the inflammatory response. So here you go, you stepped on a nail, and now we have bacteria coming into the body. So what happens is we have a widening of this blood vessel. We have these neutrophils coming and being attracted to the area. The attraction is actually called chemotaxis. And then they're going to squeeze through those little blood cells or capillaries and get into where the site of injury is to try to take away the foreign invaders. So now we're moving on to the adaptive immune system, which is also called the specific immune system. So we talked about how the innate is non-specific, meaning it can't actually recognize what type of foreign invader it's fighting, but the specific defense system, or the adaptive immune system, can. It actually has memory, which basically means it can remember particular pathogens. This is why you only get some diseases once. Like, you can only get mono really once. You can only get the chicken pox once. It's because you have memory. So this is just another chart showing you the difference between innate and adaptive immunity. So remember, innate is non-specific, so it's going to basically just kind of go ahead against any kind of foreign invader that it wants. It's really limited to just kind of infection sites, and there is no memory. And then in adaptive, the response is going to be really specific to certain foreign invaders, and it can go other places than just an infection site, and it has memory. So first we need to talk about exactly what an antigen is. An antigen is anything that can cause an immune response. It's anything that's looked at as a foreign invader or a foreign intruder. And sometimes they can be simple things like pollen, or maybe you have an annoying allergy like to cats. That's your body looking at that being a foreign intruder. Most of the time, though, it's going to be any microorganisms, so bacteria, different fungi, and viruses. So here's our antigens. We have our bacteriums and we have our viruses, but unfortunately, sometimes it even can be an allergy, and you guys have all probably felt that at some time, where we have a stupid response to something that isn't necessarily dangerous to the body, but very common. So every individual has self-antigens. We actually have different antigens on our blood cells, for example, that allow our own body cells to know what should be there and what should not be there. So our immune system is able to tell the difference between our body cells and foreign invaders. So we have our own little antigens on various cells. And sometimes this is why when you get different blood types, maybe, so let's say you have A blood and accidentally you get B blood donated to you, it's not going to be pretty because that has different antigens on it. This is also why sometimes people reject organs that have been transplanted. It's because the immune system attacks it because it looks at it as a foreign antigen and not a self-antigen. So now let's talk about the different cell types of the adaptive immune system. There are two big types that we're going to talk about, and these are lymphocytes. And there's B and T lymphocytes, or just B and T cells. And they're named after where they mature. So B cells mature in bone marrow, B for bone. And these are the guys that are going to produce antibodies. And you've probably heard of antibodies before. Antibodies are these really cool proteins. They're Y-shaped, and they help to identify antigens and target foreign invaders. They also assist in what we call humoral immunity, which means they're going to be present in humors or liquid. Then we have our T cells, which are going to mature in the thymus, T for thymus. These do not produce antibodies. And these are really important because once they mature, they help to identify foreign invaders and can actually even kill your own cells. So here is our activation of lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are always going to be made in bone marrow, but then they go to what I call lymphocyte school. Then they are going to travel to either the thymus or stay in the bone marrow where they learn their specific jobs. Then they can go and either create antibodies or help to identify foreign invader cells and destroy them. So that is where our T and B cells come from. So self-tolerance. This is one of the things that they go to school for. Remember I was just talking about they go to school and mature. Both T and B cells have to learn how to recognize your body's cells. They have to be able to identify a foreign invader, but also try to maintain that your own cells aren't dangerous. And they have to become immunocompetent, which means they have to be able to actually bind to foreign invaders. So here's our antibodies. Remember that these are going to be created by those B cells that mature in the bone marrow. They're little Y-shaped proteins, and they bind to an antigen, forming what we call an antigen-antibody complex. And there's 5 different classes of them. You can learn more about the 5 different classes when you get into your higher anatomy classes in college, but it really is interesting, these 5 classes, and the kind of differences between them. They're also called immunoglobulins. So next time you get blood work done and you get your results, look for that, and they'll have different measures of different IgSs, which are the immunoglobulins. So let's keep talking about antibodies. So antigens and foreign invaders can be inactivated by antibodies in tons of different ways. First is called the complement fixation. So the antibodies will create a hole or pore and cause the cell to lyse. Neutralization, which they bind to chemicals that are secreted by bacteria and viruses to block the harmful effects. Agglutination, which means that they bind and cause the foreign cells to clump together. And then precipitation, which is a bunch of antibodies attach, causing the foreign invader cell to be very large and more recognizable by the types of lymphocytes that can come and destroy it. So here we go, neutralization, literally blocking the bacteria or virus. Agglutination, trying to clump them all together. Precipitation, trying to make the cell larger so it's easier for other cells to come and destroy it. Or complement fixation, which allows the water to rush into the cell and lyse. All right, this is really cool. So B cells become switched on when antigens bind to the surface. So basically B cells are kind of just hanging out and they become activated when an antigen binds to them. Once an antigen binds to them, they start to rapidly multiply with cells that have kind of the same specific antigen receptors. These clones now become what we call plasma cells, and these plasma cells start to just rapidly, and I mean rapidly, produce antibodies. They can produce up to 2,000 antibodies a second, and this lasts for 4 to 5 days, and then the plasma cells die. So basically, once a B cell comes into contact with a foreign invader, it just goes nuts and starts creating antibodies like crazy. But some B cells don't actually become plasma cells. They become what we call memory cells. And these guys are going to be able to respond to the same antigen later. So if you have a strain of the flu one year and you come into contact with that same strain the next year, these B cells already know what antibodies to make when they come into contact with that foreign invader. So now instead of taking 10 days for antibodies to peak, it only is going to take 2 to 3 days now. So you're able to fight that infection and foreign invader faster and more powerful than previous. So if we look here, here is our kind of first encounter with the foreign invader. It's kind of floating around till it finds its match, and this guy goes, "Oh my gosh, that is not good. We do not want this in our body. So I'm going to start cloning like crazy." And 2 types of cells are going to be made: plasma cells and memory cells. Plasma cells just start pumping out antibodies like crazy, up to 2,000 a second. And then the memory cells are going to hang out until you come into contact with that antigen again. And then it's going to create a much larger immune response. And that's why you don't get sick the next time you come into contact with that antigen, because you're able to have a faster and more powerful immune response to it. So active humoral immunity. This can be artificially acquired through vaccines or naturally acquired through a bacterial or viral infection. So this is when you can actually just get it by walking around. Oh my gosh, I'm walking around and I get the flu. Or you get the flu vaccine and then your body prepares for it. Doesn't matter how you get it, the next time you come into contact with that same flu strain, boom, you're going to be pretty immune to it. And then we also have passive humoral immunity. So this is through the umbilical cord and then also through breastfeeding. Your mother can actually pass their antibodies to the child. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop there, and then we'll continue on, and we will talk about T cells when we come back for our third and final video.